Have you ever found yourself sitting in absolute silence, staring at your phone or looking out a window, replaying a single conversation for the 100th time, as if the right sequence of thoughts could somehow change what happened? It is an exhausting mental prison. You dissect every phrase they uttered, every shift in their tone of voice, and every promise that dissolved into thin air, searching for the hidden key that explains why they left. You convince yourself that if you could just have one more conversation, get one honest explanation, or receive one sincere acknowledgement of the pain they caused, your heart would finally feel at peace. What if the closure you are desperately chasing from them is actually an illusion designed to keep you trapped in the very pain you are trying to escape? To understand why the search for closure feels like an endless loop, you have to look at what your brain is actually doing when a connection breaks. When someone exits your life without giving you a clear, satisfying answer, your mind experiences a psychological phenomenon known as ambiguous loss. The human brain craves completion and narrative order. It hates open loops. When a story ends abruptly without a neat resolution, your mind treats the silence as a puzzle that must be solved. You begin to believe that their explanation is the final missing piece of your identity, and that until they hand you that piece, you are doomed to remain broken. Have you ever stopped to consider that waiting for their explanation is giving them total control over your emotional healing? Think about the dynamic you create when you pin your peace of mind on their willingness to give you answers. You are effectively handing the key to your internal freedom back to the exact person who mishandled your heart in the first place. You are saying, I cannot move forward, I cannot value myself, and I cannot heal until the person who hurt me validates my right to feel hurt. But here is the hard, liberating truth. An emotionally immature or avoidant person who walked away from a healthy connection rarely possesses the clarity, courage, or honesty required to give you genuine closure. If they had the emotional capacity to give you a clear, mature explanation, they likely would have had the capacity to handle the relationship honorably in the first place. If they couldn't offer you emotional honesty while they were in your life, why do you expect them to suddenly grant it to you on their way out? When you ask an emotionally unavailable ex for closure, what you usually receive is not truth, but self-protective rationalizations. They will give you soft excuses, shift the blame onto circumstances, or offer vague statements like, "It is not you, it is me," all designed to protect their own self-image and avoid uncomfortable vulnerability. Those shallow answers don't grant you peace. They just spark 10 new questions. You end up decoding their excuses, analyzing their body language, and remaining emotionally tied to their orbit. The search for closure doesn't close the door. It keeps you standing in the hallway, begging for permission to leave. What happens inside your self-worth when you realize that their silence was actually the clearest answer they could ever give you? The moment you reframe their silence, everything shifts. Silence is not a mystery to decode. Silence is a statement. Withdrawal is not a riddle. Withdrawal is a choice. Their inability to stay, their decision to pull back, and their refusal to work through difficulties with you are not half-written sentences. They are the final period at the end of the chapter. When someone shows you that they do not have the capacity, courage, or desire to choose you, that behavior is your closure. You do not need them to admit their limitations for those limitations to exist. You do not need them to apologize for the foundation to be broken. Have you ever noticed how much power you regain the exact second you stop expecting a thief to return what they stole from you? Your self-worth was never theirs to take, which means it is not theirs to return. When you tie your value to whether someone stayed or left, you operate from a fundamental misunderstanding of what worth actually is. Value is not a variable that fluctuates based on someone else's capacity to appreciate it. A masterpiece painted by a master artist does not lose its worth simply because an observer lacks the refined vision to understand its beauty. In the exact same way, your capacity to love, your vulnerability, and your depth do not diminish simply because someone else was too small to hold them. If your worth has remained entirely intact this whole time, why have you spent so much energy treating their departure as proof of your inadequacy? You have treated it as proof of inadequacy because your mind confused rejection with unworthiness. Rejection is rarely a verdict on your quality. It is almost always a statement of incompatibility or lack of readiness on their part. When a person steps away, they are reacting to how your presence interacts with their internal limitations, their fears, and their current life goals. When you stop taking their exit personally, you dismantle the single greatest lie heartbreak tells you, the lie that if you were just more, they would have stayed. Now that you see that closure is an internal decision rather than an external gift, how will you choose to close the door yourself today? Closing that door yourself requires a radical shift in how you process the urge to check in on them. When the pain of their absence hits, your nervous system experiences a physical craving for contact. You feel a sudden, overwhelming compulsion to check their social media to see if they look happy without you, or to send that one final message that might make them realize what they lost. You tell yourself that you just want clarity, or that you are just looking for proof that what you shared actually mattered to them. But every time you peek back through that keyhole, you reopen the exact emotional wound you are trying to heal. Have you ever noticed how looking for proof that they miss you only ends up proving how much power they still hold over your peace? Checking up on an ex is like picking at a scab and demanding that the scar stop bleeding. You look at a curated photo or a vague status update, and your mind immediately constructs a painful story around it. You assume they have moved on effortlessly, that they never cared, or that they are giving someone else the exact commitment they withheld from you. But you are reacting to a digital phantom. You are filling in the blanks of their life with your deepest insecurities, using their highlight reel to punish yourself for being human enough to still care. What if the narrative that they moved on without a scratch is just a fiction your own heartbreak created to keep you feeling defeated? The truth about how people move on is rarely as simple as a social media feed makes it appear. People who run away from emotional depth often use distractions, new relationships, constant social busyness, or workaholism to numb the quiet discomfort of their own choices. But whether they are genuinely happy or simply running from their own shadows is entirely irrelevant to your healing. The moment you make your recovery dependent on their internal state, you remain tethered to their life. You are allowing an ex to dictate your emotional temperature from a distance, long after they gave up the privilege of being part of your present. If their life after the breakup has no bearing on your true value, why are you still giving them the power to define your day? You give them that power because you are still operating under the belief that winning them back, or proving to them that you are doing great without them, is the ultimate form of vindication. You imagine a future scenario where they wake up, realize the mistake they made, and return to apologize for how they treated you. You play that scene over and over in your head, convincing yourself that their regret is the only thing that can restore your pride. But waiting for someone's regret is just another form of waiting for their permission to move on. It keeps your identity anchored to their judgment, keeping you trapped in the role of a person who needs to be chosen to be complete. What happens when you realize that the ultimate form of vindication isn't making them regret leaving, but forgetting to check if they do? True vindication is not about proving your worth to someone who walked away. It is about outgrowing the desire to prove anything to them at all. It is reaching a point of emotional neutrality where their presence or absence no longer dictates your internal stability. When you reach that state, you stop viewing the relationship as a battle you lost, and you start viewing it as a lesson you graduated from. You realize that the goal was never to convince an emotionally unavailable person to see your value. The goal was for you to see your value clearly enough that you stop allowing unavailable people into your inner circle. How much of your life energy have you wasted trying to convince someone to appreciate a gift they were never equipped to hold? Think about how much effort you poured into explaining basic emotional needs, maintaining patience through their distance, and adjusting your expectations just to keep the peace. You are essentially trying to teach someone how to value you while they were actively demonstrating that they lacked the capacity to do so. It is an exhausting, soul-draining battle that leaves you depleted and resentful. But when you reclaim that energy and redirect it back toward your own dreams, your own health, and your own passions, your whole life begins to transform. The focus shifts from, "Why didn't they want me?" to "What do I actually want for myself now?" Now that you are ready to stop spending your energy on someone who chose to leave, how will you begin investing that love back into your own life? Investing that love back into your own life starts with making peace with the emptiness left in their absence. When a significant relationship ends, it leaves behind a massive vacuum, not just in your schedule, but in your mind and your heart. Up until now, you have been trying to fill that vacuum with anxiety, with endless overthinking, and with attempts to monitor their world from afar. But what if you stopped fighting the emptiness? What if, instead of viewing that silence as a painful void, you began to see it as sacred space? What happens to your heart the moment you realize that the empty space they left behind is actually room for your true self to breathe? It breathes because for a very long time, you were shrinking your personality, your needs, and your voice just to fit inside the narrow boundaries of their capacity. You were so busy keeping the peace with them that you declared war on your own peace of mind. But now, without the constant demand to manage their moods, decode their signals, or walk on eggshells around their fears, that energy comes flooding back to you. The silence is no longer proof of what you lost. It is the quiet canvas upon which you get to rebuild a life that is entirely, unapologetically your own. If you no longer have to spend your days proving your worth to someone who refused to see it, who do you get to become now? You get to become the person you were always meant to be before you allowed heartbreak to make you small. You get to reconnect with the passions you set aside while you were busy holding a fading relationship together. You get to build a life so rich, so purposeful, and so grounded in self-respect that anyone who enters it in the future must meet a high standard of consistency just to be part of your world. You stop viewing yourself as a victim of someone's exit, and you step up as the sovereign author of your next chapter. Why does true healing feel less like getting over someone and more like coming home to yourself? It feels like coming home because heartbreak, at its core, is an identity crisis. When you give so much of your identity away to another person, their departure makes you feel as though a piece of your soul walked out the door with them. But they didn't take your value, your capacity to love, or your future with them. They only took their presence. Everything that made you special, everything that made you capable of loving deeply, and everything that made your connection magical came from within you. It was your light that illuminated the relationship, not theirs. Have you ever considered that the capacity for deep love you offered them was never lost, but is simply waiting to be turned inward? Turn that light inward. Give yourself the exact patience, compassion, and unwavering loyalty you so generously wasted on someone who couldn't match it. Stop apologizing for having deep feelings. Stop regretting how fiercely you cared, and stop viewing your capacity for vulnerability as a weakness. Your vulnerability is not a flaw. It is your greatest superpower. The issue was never that you loved too much. The issue was simply that you offered a high-value heart to someone who didn't have the hands to carry it. What if the next person who enters your life doesn't ask you to shrink, but thanks you for showing up with your full depth? That is the true promise of doing this deep healing work. When you stop accepting breadcrumbs, when you close the door on past phantoms, and when you refuse to settle for conditionally available love, you change your entire relational trajectory. You stop attracting people who run from depth, and you start drawing in partners who are capable of standing right beside you. You step into a world where love doesn't feel like a constant battle for validation, but like a grounded, reliable, and beautiful partnership. Now that you have reclaimed your closure, your power, and your self-worth, how will you choose to step boldly into the future you truly deserve?